Hey, this is Blonde Guy Gamer, and welcome to another They Made a Sequel. This time around, we'll be looking at the follow-up to one of the most memorable games I had the pleasure of playing, the Neverhood. Now, I've already covered this game in a bite-sized review, and I feel like playing playthrough, but if you haven't seen those or know anything about the game, the Neverhood is a claymation point-and-click adventure game on the PC by Earthworm Jim creator Doug TenNapel and his Neverhood team. The game is quite a work of art, as literally tons of clay and countless hours of stop-motion animation brought together a bizarre and wacky adventure of Clayman exploring an odd but beautifully sculpted world. And I can't help but love it. I love the humor, love the colorful surreal environments, love the animations, love the music, I love it, 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 love it. Sorry, pardon my fanboyism there. Despite the quality craftsmanship that went in this game back in '96, point-and-click adventure games weren't exactly the hottest selling thing back then, and it was unfortunately discontinued shortly after release, making this a pretty rare game to come by. I actually didn't get to play this game until I found a copy at a pawn store back in February for about $3, which is incredibly lucky because this game usually goes for around $50 online. Of course, the sales numbers didn't stop the game from having a cult status, and earlier this year, the same people that brought us the Neverhood launched a successful Kickstarter for a spiritual successor game done in the same style called Armacrog. Naturally, I contributed for a digital copy since it was announced sometime after I got the Neverhood, and I can't wait to play it. While Armacrog is a welcome comeback for another claymation adventure, the original team did make a sequel to the Neverhood back in 1998, Skullmonkeys. And you can tell just by looking at it why I picked this for a They Made a Sequel. For starters, it's on the PlayStation and not the PC, which as we all know even to this day brings many a whiny gamer whenever a sequel is on a different console they may not have or want, but is sometimes successful in doing so anyway. Second, the title. Skullmonkeys is a bit of an abstract name for a sequel to say the least. Sure, the game is about another adventure with Clayman and encountering monkeys of the skull variety, but the title itself is a little vague on the connection to the Neverhood. Those that actually have played the Neverhood will only know of Skullmonkeys beforehand from the one that only briefly appeared in the intro and being mentioned in the Hall of Records, which is over 30 screens of text depicting the game universe creators and its creations in awfully absurdly long-winded ways. I'm pretty sure I'm among the few that actually did read all of it, and believe me, it wasn't an easy read. Point is, only die-hard Neverhood fans would know this is a sequel right away. Although in Japan it's actually not as confusing, as the Neverhood was ported to the PlayStation as Clayman, and Skullmonkeys was named as Clayman 2, Skullmonkey no Okay, I'm not even going to try and say that last word there. Then again, calling the game something like the Neverhood 2, Planet of the Skullmonkeys or something like that wouldn't have quite the same ring to it. That, and looking at the cover, does show the Neverhood team and DreamWorks Interactive logos as the developer and publisher once again respectively, and seeing Clayman in the back would help to know this is a Neverhood sequel. Before you could just find that out with a bit of Wikipedia research anyway. We also have Electronic Arts to thank for distributing the game on the system. I am not in the mood to hear you go on about EA again. Plus, it does have a nifty holographic thing going for it to stand out, which is actually just part of the jewel case in edge-lined plastic with a section of cover printed daggly to give that effect. Wait, patents pending? I wonder if those ever went through for this holographic case thingy. The biggest departure though is that this is not another point-and-click adventure game, but a side-scrolling platformer. However, a lot of what made the first Neverhood game a treat to play is still here, albeit in a different genre now. So let's break out the clay once again and mold into Skullmonkeys. The game starts off with a stop-motion cutscene in the last game's antagonist Clog falling through the cosmos and landing on Iznak, home planet of the Skullmonkeys. He promptly lands on one and immediately takes its skull and fur and proclaims he is now Clogmonkey, leader of the Skullmonkeys. He easily convinces his simple-minded boneheads to make an evil engine, number 9 to be exact, to destroy the Neverhood. Fortunately, an intelligent and tech-savvy Skullmonkey named Jerio is well aware of Clog's evilness and sends a contraption to retrieve Clayman, who is enjoying chilling out in the Neverhood with his friend Willy until he is whisked away to Iznak. Clayman doesn't seem to mind that much, and even takes some pictures along the way, and suddenly get the credits. A little abrupt, but okay. Then Clayman drops off into the planet and the main menu. Starting a new game begins right off the bat as you move Clayman through many worlds with many platforms with many enemies and obstacles. As far as the gameplay goes, Skullmonkeys is similar to the likes of stylistic 2D platformers like Donkey Kong Country. And like those, enemies follow a simple pattern and most you can defeat by jumping on them, or butt stomp as the game likes to call it. As well as having a number of lives that you can lose from getting hit or falling, which I find kind of funny that Clayman can die since he didn't in the Neverhood. Well, with the exception of jumping down the drain, but with all those warning signs you're pretty much inclined to. So death from falling is naturally understandable there. A lot of other traditional platform mechanics are used here too, such as collecting 100 clay balls to get an extra life, finding extra lives on their own, and halos that give you a free hit, though they're not that common to come across. Checkpoints are attained by jumping on mob bird statues, which I have more fun than I should continuously jumping on them. Now you might be thinking that so far this game is a case of style over substance, and I'll admit that is true, but not in a bad way, as I feel the gameplay still holds up reasonably well. It's not unlike Donkey Kong Country and people saying it's just a standard side-scroller with pretty graphics, but I still had fun with it, and it's the style of those games along with building on a solid playable foundation is what helps keep them remain cherished. Because of that, Skullmonkeys is far from simply being a bare-bones platformer with a beat-up face, as the amount of power-ups and collectibles help make things engaging. There's shot orbs that let you shoot enemies, hamsters that act as a 3-hit shield, fart heads that make a gas clone of you acting as a temporary checkpoint, homing birds that shoot a heat-seeking handbird at enemies, though they don't have the best tracking at times, universe enemas that take out all on-screen enemies, and willy heads that collect all visible items. These are good in a pinch if you don't want to risk losing a life and just say, screw it, to make things a little easier. Although you can only carry up to 7 of the last 4, and 20 shots, so I suggest saving them for moments you feel you really need them. Plus, finding these items and extra lives throughout the levels and secret areas helps keep exploring them an incentive. Being thorough also rewards you with swirly cues, which after finding 3 of them in every world, lets you enter a bonus room stage at the end of the world to collect more extra lives and power-ups. There is even a special bonus world called the 1970s where you find all 3 1970s pickups in the game and enter it within the bonus stage of the world you found the last 1970 in. Wow, this sure is a 1970s stage, alright. Groovy shade carpet there. Oh god, I think some acid just kicked in. This really is the 70s. I can see forever, man! In terms of the controls, they are quite responsive, but perhaps a bit too responsive as it can be fairly easy to slip off narrow platforms and miss landing on enemies due to the sensitive movement. They do at least perform well enough after getting the feel for it, and you're going to have to because the precision and timing needed for some jumps can get pretty demanding. It gets especially tricky in later worlds where the challenge can reach near absurd levels of difficulty. The bosses you face every few worlds on the other hand are a prime example of a game having hard levels but easy bosses. Don't get me wrong, these bosses look cool, but once you've figured out their easily telegraphed attack patterns, they're a cakewalk. Even the last boss with Clog, while amusing that you attack in a Tubomobile to grab and shoot giant clay balls at him, is pretty anticlimactic. Although I do have a soft spot for Jowhead Joe, if only for being what he is. This is probably the closest an American-made game can reach levels of what the fuck Japan. It's not just the bosses that are unbalanced either, as the worlds can be all over the place in difficulty, most particularly in the latter half of the game. Needless to say, losing all your lives and game overing is bound to happen. You can continue on the stage you game overed in, but at the cost of losing all your items, including any swirly cues and 1970s you had, and with only 5 extra lives. Of course, with this game being on the PlayStation, saving on a memory card would be expected. Except this game doesn't use the memory card at all. Instead, you're given a password for every world you clear. So I hope you kept the pen and paper you used for the Neverhood around, because you're going to need it for writing down passwords. Or just playback recorded footage like I did. Okay, why? Granted, some early PlayStation games didn't have a save option and use passwords as well, or had the ability to both save or use passwords if you didn't have a memory card yet. But Skullmonkeys came out in 1998, nearly 3 years after the PlayStation debuted, and by then, saving games on a memory card on that system was standard. It's the most baffling thing about this game for me. And even then, the password system isn't perfect. Continuing with the password does retain whatever lives, items except for clay balls and shots, and 1970s you had at the start of the world, but it also resets your score, which in the long run doesn't matter much, but it resets how many worlds you clear too, which can make it hard to know how much you've progressed. There are 17 worlds that have around 3 to 5 stages each, so this game is nothing short on content. Sometimes there's an option at the end of the level to enter a red teleport ball as opposed to a normal one. The red ones throw you in a different stage that's more difficult, and considering how challenging the game is to begin with, you might as well just stick with the regular ones unless you want an excuse for some replay value. Even if you don't deviate into alternate stages, there are still a ton of different locations, all with their own set of gimmicks to prevent things from getting too repetitive, one of which is even a throwback to a mechanic used in the first game. There's also a couple stages that change the gameplay up a bit, making them welcome brief diversions from the usual platforming. The only problem with all these levels is that after a while the game starts to drag on a little. In the Neverhood, you could play through the game within a couple of hours, but it went at a good pace, while with Skullmonkeys it feels a tad overboard with the amount of worlds and levels they cram in. It doesn't help that continuing with passwords starts at the beginning of each world, and constantly losing all your lives and redoing the same stages can get tiring. The game's difficulty also contributes to the fact that most items collected and used are permanent even after dying, so you need to be extra careful when using them, or else you waste it if you die before reaching another checkpoint. I had a considerable amount of trouble getting through the 10th world where you need to get past enemies you can't jump on, and if you thought getting past the zingers in Donkey Kong Country were annoying timing sections, these are worse. After several tries, I eventually just caved in and used a 99 live cheat code so I wouldn't spend an eternity beating the game the normal way. Most of you probably won't blame me, but if anyone accuses me of being incapable of beating hard games, I'll just remind them I beat the F-Zero GX story chapters on very hard. Only took me 9 years, but I did. However, with 99 lives, I became more reckless and I started depleting at a steady rate during some of the harder levels that followed. But don't get me started on the last world, Evil Engine number 9, because it's by far the most difficult with insane time platform jumps, and if you aren't perfect, you die, and die, and die so much you have to keep putting the 99 lives to use, and it just keeps going, and going, and I just want the sniper to end and not spend hours and hundreds of lives just because I keep fucking falling in it! I think it's time we move away from that and focus on what I really enjoyed from this game. The game looks fantastic, but that's a given since it uses the same claymation techniques from the Neverhood. It may not be as involved as exploring a fully constructed model world like in the first game, but the amount of set pieces and the diversity of all the worlds is still pretty impressive. Although there are times when foreground objects can obstruct your view, and one world makes it hard to see where Clayman is sometimes. Regardless, Skullmonkeys definitely makes good use of the PlayStation hardware, and even has a few full motion cutscenes all in one disc. These will definitely make Neverhood fans feel at home, as they are the same video and animation quality. Same with the sense of humor, as it's just as offbeat as the first game.
P.S. Do not eat of the root, or you will break out in painful, itchy sores.
And if you loved the wonderfully absurd and catchy music in the Neverhood, then Skullmonkeys won you over in that department too, as Terry Scott Taylor brings melodies that are just as good, if not better in this game due to having more variety this time around. This is no doubt a favorite game soundtrack of mine, and I always grin like an idiot whenever I listen to these. It's just so humorous that I can't help it. Such as what is quite possibly the greatest bonus room tune ever, the Little Bonus Room.
Here's a little bonus room, 'cause I know you've had it tough. And here's a little bonus tune about collecting real cool stuff. There are no monsters here. Hey, wait, look over there. I was just kidding. Don't be scared.
Fans will also appreciate a couple callbacks to the original Neverhood songs too. There is only one thing I didn't like about the music, and this is a minor complaint, is that the menu track is reused for one of the worlds, but I still adore it. The rest of the sounds do an admirable job, and so does the voice acting. Even Clayman is slightly more vocal this time around.
Cool.
Despite the difficulty peaks and lackluster bosses, I can't say I didn't like Skullmonkeys. It's a fun and creatively funny platformer and a solid sequel to the Neverhood despite the change of gameplay. Only problem is that this game is only slightly less expensive than Neverhood, and unlike that game, this wasn't a lucky find. I had to shell out $40 for a copy. And that's not including the extra shipping costs I had to pay due to being Canadian and eBay changing its international shipping policies. Yeah, thanks for that when I'm only an hour away from the border, by the way. Still, as a Neverhood fan, I felt it was worth it, and if you're also a fan, then I'd check it out, if only to see Clayman in another game. Although he did appear as a secret character in the last game the Neverhood studio made, Boombots. And you thought the Neverhood and Skullmonkeys were obscure? There's also a Japanese-only spin-off called Clayman Gun Hockey on the PlayStation, which is kind of ironic that Japan seems to like something weird American-made. But other than that, we just have the two main installments in the Neverhood universe. But like I said, we do have Armor Crowd coming next year, and these two games are still very memorable. It's just too bad neither of them are that easy to get. There were talks about trying to get the Neverhood on mobile and Apple devices a couple years ago, but that hasn't happened yet. Personally, I think having the Neverhood on something like Good Old Games or Skullmonkeys on PlayStation Network would help tremendously get these games more accessibility it deserves these days. Though when it comes to who still owns the rights to the game, DreamWorks Interactive eventually became EA Los Angeles, which made the Medal of Honor games, Boom Blocks, and the Command & Conquerors after Westwood closed. I said no! Anyway, they then became Danger Close Games and developed the modern Medal of Honor games. Yeah, after Warfighter flopped, that studio closed and its employees went to DICE LA to help with Battlefield 4. I assume EA still owns the rights to these games, and if that's the case, then I hope they can eventually work out having the Neverhood on Good Old Games, or Steam, or iOS, or anything, and Skullmonkeys on PlayStation Network, and actually do something people would find positive from them these days. We'll just have to wait and see, but in the meantime, if you're ever lucky enough to come across either of these games for a decent price, then I can't recommend them enough. So in closing, let's give half a cheer to Skullmonkeys and the Neverhood for being the unforgettable artistic games they are.
Hip hip hoo! It is now time to goof off.